Why is it that the reactions I regret the most feel like they weren't even mine? That's the paradox that chases me. The more automatic my behavior becomes, the more I mistake it for who I am. I tell myself it's just my personality, or that my focus is too fragile, or that my motivation disappears at the exact moment I need it. I blame dopamine, attention span, even a kind of spiritual laziness. But beneath all that noise is a quieter truth. I'm not reacting to the present. I'm reacting to the residue of everything I've been and everything I've avoided learning about myself. It hits me in the smallest moments. Someone interrupts me and my chest flashes with heat before I can think. A message goes unanswered for too long, and suddenly a storm of assumptions owns my entire mind. It's as if my reactions arrive fully assembled, already rushing toward the world while I'm still scrambling to catch up. I start to wonder, do I choose anything at all? This is where Nietzsche and William James enter, not as mythic intellects, but as two radically different mirrors. Nietzsche demands that I stop pretending weakness is fate, that I stop confusing habit with truth. His voice is a blade, cutting through every excuse I offer. James, on the other hand, whispers that change begins in the smallest, almost invisible actions, that I can act my way into a new emotional life, even when my feelings refuse to cooperate. One gives me fire, the other gives me tools. Between them, I begin to see my reactions for what they are, patterns shaped by repetition, fueled by unexamined fears, and kept alive by my refusal to interrupt them. Focus isn't a gift, it's a consequence. Motivation isn't magic, it's a strategy. Dopamine isn't destiny, it's just one piece of a far more complicated human machine. But knowing this doesn't free me, it corners me. Because once I understand the machinery, I can't pretend I'm powerless anymore. And that's where the tension begins, right here, before the story even starts. I step into the first truth reluctantly, as if touching a bruise I've denied for years. My reactions own me more often than I own them. It's embarrassing to admit how quickly I can be hijacked by a tone of voice, a raised eyebrow, a delayed response. I'd like to believe I'm deliberate, that I think before I act, but the honesty is harsher. I feel first, act next, and only think afterward, when the debris of the moment settles across my mind like dust after a small explosion. And in that aftermath, I watch myself invent justifications so I don't have to face how mechanical I've become. These moments first revealed themselves on an ordinary morning. I was pouring coffee when someone in the kitchen accidentally brushed my arm. Nothing aggressive, nothing intentional, yet my body stiffened as if danger had entered the room. The cup rattled in my hand. A flash of irritation rose without permission. I stood there, confused by myself. Why did such a harmless touch feel like intrusion? Why did my pulse decide before my mind could speak? I realized then that my reactions weren't born from the moment at all. They were echoes from older rooms, older wounds, older versions of me that still believed the world was sharper than it really was. Nietzsche presses into this realization with the severity of a storm. He demands that I stop calling this reflex natural or just how I am. He says every instinct can be reforged if I'm willing to face its origin. But William James leans in differently, reminding me that understanding alone won't change a thing unless I behave differently, even clumsily, even before I feel ready. Their tension forms a strange chorus inside me. One voice urging me to burn the old pattern, the other urging me to practice the new one in the smallest motions. I start holding on to a single metaphor. My reactions are doors that swing too easily. Anyone, anything, any memory can open them. My work is not to seal them shut, but to strengthen the hinges so they don't collapse at the slightest touch. If this reflection reaches you in some quiet corner of your own inner life, subscribe and stay close. We walk this unfolding path together, learning to choose our reactions before they choose us, with each small breath becoming a quieter beginning again. I notice the next wave of truth rising almost reluctantly, like a tremor I've tried to pretend isn't happening. It begins in a moment that should have been forgettable. I was standing at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change when a car honked behind me. The sound wasn't even directed at me, but my body reacted as if I'd been personally accused. My shoulders tightened, and for a second I felt the old script unfolding. Irritation first, defensiveness next, the familiar tightening of a story I didn't consciously choose. I caught myself in the middle of it, suspended between impulse and awareness, and felt the strange earthquake of seeing my own mind operate without my consent. I realized that every reaction I've ever had comes from some hidden architecture built long before I knew how to question it. The earthquake wasn't the honk. It was the realization that I've been living inside a blueprint I never drafted. And that's when the deeper disturbance began. The recognition that the world I think I'm responding to is rarely the one in front of me. Most of the time, I'm responding to ghosts. The teacher who scolded me too sharply, the friend who once vanished. Without explanation, the memory of being misunderstood at the exact moment I needed gentleness. These ghosts stand behind every present moment, nudging my reactions before I can even see them. Nietzsche confronts me here, insisting that these inherited reflexes are chains disguised as instincts. He urges me to break them with the force of someone reclaiming a stolen inheritance. But William James challenges me in a quieter, more unsettling way. He says that even if I uncover every origin, even if I trace every reaction back to its source, nothing changes unless I choose a different motion in the moment of the quake. Awareness is necessary, he whispers, but it is not sufficient. I must behave differently before I feel different, or I will remain a servant to the tremors. This conflict tears at me, the desire to tear everything down versus the need to rebuild with patient, ordinary actions. But in that tension, a metaphor forms. Reaction as tectonic plates shifting beneath the surface. The world above shakes, not because the moment is powerful, but because the foundation beneath it is still living in the past. And standing at that crosswalk, with the echo of the honk fading, I felt the first fragile possibility of stillness. I felt something inside me harden into a decision I didn't fully understand, a kind of internal pull toward the fire rather than away from it. It happened late at night, when the world had finally quieted enough for the darker truths to rise without. Interruption. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the dim glow of a street lamp leaking through the blinds, when a memory surfaced. Not gently, but like a blade pushed upward through the soil. It was the memory of a moment I had buried years ago, a moment when I had stayed silent instead of defending myself. My body had absorbed that silence, turned it into a blueprint, and repeated it in every confrontation since. As the memory replayed itself in the quiet room, I felt something ignite. It wasn't anger exactly. It was more like an ancient refusal awakening. This was Nietzsche's entrance, not as a philosopher but as a force. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence was a pressure, like a storm forming inside the ribcage. He demanded that I stop bowing to the weight of old moments. He insisted that if a memory could shape my reaction, then I could shape the memory in return. Not rewrite the facts, but reclaim the meaning. I felt him urging me to stand straighter, as if posture alone could start to unravel years of inherited weakness. And in that strange, electric stillness, I saw the truth of what he offered, the chance to become the one who chooses, not the one who flinches. But almost immediately, William James entered with a different kind of gravity. His presence felt like sitting down after standing too long, like bringing the fire to the ground so it could warm instead of burn. He didn't challenge Nietzsche. He confronted me. He reminded me that insight doesn't rewrite reflexes. Repetition does. If I wanted a new pattern, I'd have to practice it in moments that felt too small to matter. The slight pause before responding, the softer breath before reacting, the gentle unclenching of the jaw when tension tries to seize the moment. He made it clear that transformation isn't dramatic, it's methodical. And caught between their forces, I felt the conflict sharpen into a living tension. One part of me wanting to erupt into a new self in a single night, the other knowing I must become that person inch by inch. It was then that I saw the image rise before me, a forge glowing in the dark, and my reactions as malleable metal waiting for the next strike. I woke the next morning with the image of the forge still glowing behind my eyes. But now, it felt less like a symbol and more like a responsibility. I understood that reclaiming my reactions wouldn't happen in moments of dramatic revelation, but in the unnoticed stretches of ordinary life, where the old patterns waited, patient and familiar. As I moved through my apartment, I felt them gathering around me the way dust collects on untouched shelves, the pull to rush, to defend, to interpret every small gesture as threat. They all returned with their quiet authority. For a moment I felt the old heaviness rising, the sense that I was trying to climb out of a story that kept rewriting itself around me. This was where William James stepped forward with his unsettling clarity. He reminded me that change is not an emotional event. It is a behavioral apprenticeship. I had to train myself to react differently long before it felt natural, long before my emotions agreed. So I began with the smallest of experiments. When my phone buzzed with a message that normally would have sent a spike of anxiety through my chest, I paused. I breathed once. I allowed the reaction to swell without obeying it. The pause was barely a second, but in that second, I felt the possibility of choice widen like a narrow door being nudged open. Nietzsche did not soften in these moments. If anything, his presence sharpened. He urged me to take pride in the experiment, to see each small act as a strike against the cowardice I had inherited. He insisted that power is not born fully formed. It is hammered into existence through repetition, pressure, and defiance. The conflict between them, the fire and the method, tugged at me, but in that tension, I began to understand the work. I needed both. I needed the will to step into discomfort and the discipline to stay there until a new pattern formed. The metaphor returned, clearer now. My reactions were molten metal, and each tiny behavioral shift was another strike of the hammer shaping their form. The work was slow, imperfect, and strangely intimate, but as I moved through the day, I felt the smallest flicker of authorship returning to me, as if I were learning to speak a language I had once known but forgotten. And still, the work quietly continued within me. I didn't expect the turning point to arrive in such an unremarkable moment, but that's how most awakenings work. They sneak in through the smallest cracks, not the grand ones. I was sitting alone in a cafe, a place where the clatter of cups and low murmurs usually soothed me, when a stranger accidentally bumped my table. My coffee trembled, a few drops sliding over the rim. The old reflex surged instantly, tight chest, sharpened breath, an instinct to armor myself. But something else rose with it this time, something quieter and sturdier. I didn't try to suppress the reaction. I simply watched it, the way you watch a wave crest toward the shore knowing it will break whether you interfere or not. And for the first time, I felt the distance between stimulus and response widen just enough for me to step inside. In that small space, I sensed both Nietzsche and James pressing in, not as competing philosophies, but as two different gravitational pulls that shaped the same orbit. Nietzsche urged me to take the moment personally, not as injury but as opportunity. He insisted that strength is forged precisely here, in the ordinary disruptions where most people collapse back into habit. He whispered that the self I wanted wasn't waiting in the future. It was being created in this exact second, in whether I rose or recoiled. His fire pushed me toward authorship, but James grounded me with equal force. He reminded me that this newfound space wasn't magic. It was the byproduct of repetition. I had practiced that single breath, I had rehearsed that pause. I had trained myself to behave differently even when it felt unnatural. And now, in this tiny cafe, the training held. He taught me that freedom doesn't descend. It accumulates, one deliberate act at a time. The metaphor came alive in that moment. I was the blacksmith and the metal, the fire and the hammer, the trembling moment and the steady hand shaping it. My reactions were no longer unchangeable laws, but heated material waiting for direction. I felt the emotional climax rise inside me, not as triumph but as recognition. I had not escaped my old patterns. I had begun to rewrite them from within. I looked at the stranger, offered a gentle nod, and felt a quiet, earned peace settle across me. Not victory, not perfection, just authorship, finally quietly mine. If this journey resonates with you, stay close. Like the forge, this work deepens with company. Subscribe, comment, or simply linger. Your presence shapes the fire as much as the fire shapes you.